They can't all be winners, right? Hi guys, we're doing something a little bit different today. There are DIY videos that you watch to get a sense of what to do, and then there are DIY videos that you watch almost accidentally because you think that they're gonna show you what to do, and instead the comments are just full of people just roasting their asses. Actually, I could use the engagement, so if you want to roast me, that's totally fine. I consider myself to be a reasonably crafty person. I'm a big believer in the why pay somebody 50 bucks to do this when you could spend $100 on supplies to do it and do it poorly. I got a baby YouTube channel to feed, and I noticed there were not a lot of tutorials out there on dyeing Superga sneakers. For those of you who don't know, Superga is an Italian brand. They make really sort of clean, basic canvas sneakers in a really limited amount of styles and a few different colors. Maybe the best thing that my country has contributed to the world since pasta. I'm being told we didn't actually invent pasta, we just stole it from China. Yeah, we didn't actually invent pasta, we did invent Columbusing. Look it up, we invented Columbus, he was Italian. So I had a pair of white Superga sneakers that I basically made my only pair of shoes during this spring and early summer, because I was only going out of the house once a week to buy groceries, and why would I need anything other than one pair of white sneakers? Over the past few months, they're getting a little bit dull. They're getting a little bit worn out. Part of the issue with white canvas sneakers is that you can't really fully keep them white as time goes on, because a lot of the time there's glue inside the shoe, and if you get it wet, you get these weird sort of off yellowy stains on your shoes. Every time I washed them, I was having to gob on OxyClean and magic erasers and just trying desperately to keep them from turning yellow as I washed them. I figured these were a prime candidate for a DIY attempt. In the interest of science, I decided that I was going to try over-dyeing these shoes to be a different, darker color so that dirt and, those yellowing stains wouldn't really become an issue anymore because I wouldn't be trying to maintain the white. Worst comes to worst, I actually had bought another pair of identical Superga sneakers on Poshmark. If I needed to get rid of these, I had another pair in the chamber ready and waiting. Ideally, I wouldn't ruin these. I mean, I would love to make them into something I would wear because they're a decent pair of shoes. They have plenty of life left in them still. I just kind of wanted to turn them into something else. I've been watching a lot of Carrie Dayton's videos lately, and she recently got a pair of rust red suede Vans. They're so, so beautiful. And I was thinking, well, maybe instead of going out and spending money on another pair of sneakers, I could try to make a similar sort of item using what I already had. Attempts were made.
So I started out the process by cleaning the shoes with some soap and an old toothbrush. It suggested you do that beforehand in order to remove any dirt that might interfere with the dye adhering to the piece. It also wets the fabric, which is supposed to allow for better dye penetration. I tried to get some close-up shots of the wet shoes to show the discoloration that was happening around the edges when I washed the shoes. You can't really tell in this shot, it was honestly pretty minor. Once that was done, I gave the soles a wipe in the hopes of taking off some of the excess moisture and letting the tape stick better. It didn't work. We'll get to that. So I bought 3 boxes of Tintex dye in orange, red, and brown. And I wasn't sure what mix of the 3 was going to get me that rusty red color that I wanted. I assumed it was going to be mostly red with a little bit of orange and brown to sort of adjust. So the next step was taping the shoes, and I tried painter's tape to start, and then some electrical tape, and then this bright yellow duct tape that you're seeing here. The problem was that since I had gone kind of insane with the soap earlier, even though the soles weren't actually soaking wet anymore, it created this slick kind of soapy surface, and nothing would stick to it. So there's a good 20 minutes of me fighting with different varieties of tape, and eventually, after an extended period of this, I finally just stuck the shoes in my oven on the lowest possible setting in order to get them to dry out. So while all that was happening, I got my water to boil in a stainless steel pot that I didn't mind using for crafty projects, and I started mixing up my dye. So I started with about half a pack of red, half a pack of orange, and maybe a third of a package of brown. And I mixed that all up with a metal chopstick that I had handy, and then I took a piece of paper towel to test the color. And it was way more reddish brown than I thought it was going to look, so I added in some more orange, tested it again, added the rest of the orange, tested it again, and it looked exactly the same. I decided to just sort of deal with that later and got my toasty shoes out of the oven and finally got the tape to stick, mostly. So as a bit of a plan B, I also got some Vaseline and I sort of gobbed it into any potential leaks that I could see in the edges of where I had put the tape on the shoes. Since the color wasn't quite where I wanted it, I went back outside, pet this cat, got back to the store, bought 2 boxes of yellow Tintex, started going back home, pet this cat a second time, and went back to my dye to see if I could fix the color. So I poured in a full box of this yellow dye to start, stirred it up, checked the color again, still a gross red-brown. Poured in a second box of yellow dye, stirred it up again, checked the color, and yep, exactly the same. I don't know how to frame a camera angle yet, but those were 2 swatches I did before and after adding the yellow dye. So at this point I figured, buy the ticket, take the ride, and I put the shoes directly into the dye bath. And I agitated the shoes in the dye in an attempt to get the dye to soak into the shoes evenly, while also coming to the horrible realization that I hated how this color was looking. Pro tip, if you don't like the color of a dye on a swatch, you sure as shit won't like it more when it's actually on your item of clothing. Reflect on your life and how you got to this point. As if that wasn't bad enough, I soon came to the horrifying realization that thanks to the hot water, my duct tape had completely given up on all will to live, so the sole was now that same hideous reddish brown.
The duct tape is coming, completely out. Oh god. Yeah, it's completely... Oh god, no. Oh, you poor ugly bastards. Oh, it's just hideous. It's just fucking hideous.
There was no real going back at this point, so I just kept moving my shoes around in the dye for the next 20 minutes while wondering if there was potentially a market for menstruation, the commemorative shoe. I held on a little bit of hope that maybe after I got the rest of the dye out, the color might fade a little bit and actually look sorta cute. So I took the shoes down to my laundry room, gave them a good rinse, and was pleasantly surprised to find that actually, I'm just kidding, they're horrible. These shoes they're so bad, they're so hideous. These shoes are a goddamn travesty, they're an affront to God and to all things decent, and burn them alive.
At the end of it all, after dyeing, I put the shoes back on and realized that because I had dunked them in hot water, they were actually slightly too small to wear. They weren't comfortable anymore. If I'd tried them on in the store or something, I wouldn't have taken them. The difference was that pronounced.
So even though these shoes were officially beyond saving at this point, in the interest of science, I decided to try out another product I had on hand just to see how it worked on a similar shoe. So I had this bottle of Feebing's leather dye in black, which is something that I had left over from a different project, and I still use it sometimes to touch up my leather bags and leather goods of various kinds. So I took a paintbrush and I applied it to both the canvas part and to the rubber part of the shoe. So it's a really runny ink-like consistency and it seeps right into the material, but it's also really, really dark and it stains right over pretty much anything. And on the patches that I tried, you couldn't even see any of the brown dye anymore. So you're supposed to rub off the excess when you work with leather, just with a paper towel or a rag or something to buff off the extra product. So I got a little bit of the product to rub off on this shoe doing that, but not very much. So I think that it could actually work without too much dye transfer, but if you do use this method in the future, you might want to either seal it with some kind of product or really just take the time to buff off the extra dye until it's no longer transferring. Or just wear black socks, whatever.
So what did we learn today? Here's what I would do differently if I were doing this now. For starters, I would have spent more time on sneaker customization YouTube, which I found out 12 hours ago was a thing. I mean, of course it's a thing, there's YouTube for everything else, why wouldn't this be a thing? But I only started watching 1000 2 weeks ago, man, give me a damn break. Number one, what I would do if I was trying to change the color of a Superga or some other canvas sneaker, don't use the hot dye method. This might work for items of clothing that you can get nice and hot. A canvas sneaker is not one of those things. I would suggest if you're gonna use clothing dye, like liquid clothing dye, I would do sort of the spray-on kind of tie-dye method where you just put it onto the shoe but you don't immerse the shoe and let it sit for a really long time. I would pick a lighter color that didn't require that level of saturation that it would take to dye it by submerging it in a really long time, because I think that's part of where I sort of got overzealous. My thinking was I wanted this really vibrant color in the end. So what I had to do was, of course, immerse this in hot dye for a long time because that's how you get a bright color. I would also be much more careful about how I mix that dye. The brown dye was so pigmented that it basically just completely overwrote anything else that I put in that dye bath. I mean, you guys saw, I put in a full packet of orange, about half a packet of red, a third of a packet of brown, and 2 full packages of yellow. And I still got that gross, muddy red-brown color. And the yellow did nothing. Like, it didn't move the needle on the color at all. If you're gonna do the full dye method, assume that you're gonna get it on the soles. The tape did nothing. The Vaseline did nothing. I don't know why I thought that tape was going to stand up to hot water. I mean, hot water half the time is what you use to get adhesive off of things. You go, I'll just put some duct tape on this thing. No, like don't kid yourself. And if you're gonna do that, choose a color that you're comfortable getting the whole sole dyed. Again, if you're gonna try to sort of keep the sole, the midsole, the same color as before, you can't do the immersion dye method. You have to pick a way that's only gonna color the upper and then have the rest of the shoe just be dry so that that tape can actually properly do its job. On a shoe with some wear and tear, assume that that sole will not dye evenly because of the way that the shoe has sort of been worn and like scuffed. There's going to be texture to that shoe that a brand new pair might not have. If I was going to do this over again, I would have chosen a fabric paint. My recent foray into sneaker YouTube has taught me that there's a lot of stuff available that could help you just change the color all over of a shoe that are more suited to this. So Angelus makes paints. Also, leather dye is an option, and that's probably a better option for doing like the midsole of a shoe because essentially you're not supposed to put a product that sits on top of a midsole like a paint because it's gonna flex, it's not gonna adhere properly. The general consensus in like the sneaker community seems to be that you probably just shouldn't paint midsoles at all because there's no real way to prevent it from cracking or flaking off. But just testing out the black Phoebing's leather dye, it actually seemed to take pretty well. So if I was going to change the color of a sole, I would use something like that, something like an ink that seeps into the rubber instead of painting it over top. So we couldn't save the shoes, and I feel bad about it. I don't like wasting stuff, but they're so jacked looking, and they're probably damaged a fair bit from just being soaked in water for so long. I wouldn't really feel comfortable donating those. They're pretty bad. I think I'm just gonna have to chalk this one up to experience, and you know, hopefully sneaker YouTube doesn't find this and hand me my ass. But if you want to, that's okay. I need the views. Thanks for coming along with me on this journey. Hopefully my next DIY attempt will be less of a trash fire. I'll see you guys when I see you guys. Bye.